Hello, everyone, and thank you, BIM Harambe Africa, for having me here. I'm really excited to share with you my research experience on BIM. It's a very academic or theoretical research, I would say. So before I start my presentation, let me give you a brief overview about myself. My name is Asgedom Haile. I'm a practicing professional architect, currently residing in Addis Ababa and working in an architectural firm called Consult PLC since 10 years as a founder and managing partner. I'm also a lecturer at Addis Ababa University nearly for the past 15 years. And additionally, I'm a PhD candidate at Bauhaus University of Weimar, Germany. So this is more or less my PhD dissertation. And very recently, we also managed with my friends to found Ethiopian BIM Society. So the topic of my presentation, or the title of my presentation, is Why Should Africa Be Compelled to Adopt BIM? Theorizing BIM's frozen potential to mitigate risks of corruption. My focus would be on Ethiopian AEC industry. I have to admit that it's a pity that still we have to talk about the why of BIM's adoption instead of the how. But since BIM is in its germinating stage of development in our continent, we have to do this. We have to motivate, we have to provoke or persuade policymakers and technology adopters. So the outline of my presentation will be, first I will give you background, theory and context, methodology, findings and propositions, and then finally, of course, conclusion. As you all know, the purpose of any research is to discover what has not been discovered yet, to fill the gap or the knowledge gap. But there lies a motivation or reason behind every topic. Sometimes we call it a research problem. So what are my research problems, or what kind of problems did I find? I aggregated them into international, national, and personal. Internationally, the construction industry is $1 trillion industry. It accounts about 1/3 of gross capital formation in most countries. 12 to 25% of GDP of most countries. Unfortunately, the construction industry is consistently ranked as one of the most fertile breeding ground for economic crimes. And the economic cost of corruption is estimated to be between 20 to 30% of project values. It's impossible to study the full cost of corruption, of course, empirically because of two reasons. First, it's a very hidden exercise. And second, the cost of corruption in construction goes beyond economic loss. There are quality compromises, disaster, social and political crisis. But anyhow, the construction industry ranked consistently as one of the 3 most corrupt industries worldwide, alongside the defense and extractive industries. And unfortunately, again, there is no strong theoretical and practical link that has been established so far between technological solutions like BIM and social challenges like corruption. And also what I forgot to tell you is in Africa, a research made in 2012 estimated that up to 140 billion USD is stolen every year from this continent due to corruption and mismanagement from all the industries. And currently it's estimated that the global loss of corruption in the construction industry is well over 1 billion USD per day, only in this industry, imagine. So you can imagine the loss. So what I am trying to do is to walk on this delicate interface between social economic challenge, like corruption indeed, on one side, and on the other side is technology or technological solution, which I'm focusing is the BIM. And nationally, the socio-economic and political significance of the construction industry is very high in Ethiopia. Growth rates as high as 25% were registered in the past decade. Fortunately or unfortunately, the public sector accounts between 55 to 65% of this development. And more than 65% of annual public expenditure goes to the construction works. So you can imagine how much of the fund is withdrawn to this industry. But regardless of this fact, the sector lacks clear policy directions, and because of this, failed to bring transparency and integrity. Corruption risk in all value chains is estimated to be between 25 and 35%. And the Ethiopian construction industry is also characterized as analog, silos, prone to error, and very much dependent on two-dimensional drawings. Because of this, a strong desire for policy revision and technology adoption was required since 5 years. So BIM adoption was put explicitly in the second growth and transformation plan of the country. So by that time, before like 5 years, I start to ask what could possibly be Ethiopia's rationalism, because different countries have brought customized strategies or objectives for its adoption. Of course, under the umbrella of the main objective, increasing efficiency. If we go to UK, for instance, as they put it in the objective, they wanted to cut the cost of procurement by 20%. And for Scandinavians, it's about promoting prefabrication. And for Asians, like Singapore, it became more about energy efficiency. So what could possibly be Ethiopia's rationalism when we adopt BIM? So from my personal experience and preliminary studies, I came to know that corruption is the main challenge that is shackling the Ethiopian AEC industry. Of course, there is also personal motivation. I cannot be immune from this economic as well as social crimes. As I am a private company owner and also as an individual practicing professional architect, it affects my life. So there are this international, national, and personal motivation or reason for this. The overall aim of the research project is to provoke policymakers, practitioners, technology developers by constructing this anti-corruption theoretical BIM-based rationale for risky areas of the industry. So specifically, however, is to answer the question, how can BIM be utilized and leveraged to mitigate risks of corruption? Of course, this comes with lots of primary and secondary questions, like what are the different forms and schemes of corruption, and understanding the level of corruption in the sector, and in which states and activities are the degree of vulnerability to corruption higher, and what are the opportunities for corruptors to exercise corruption easily, and so on. And secondary questions like, why is the sector highly prone to corruption? And what are the associated costs of corruption also in our industry? So I reviewed lots of literature and then theories on BIM and corruption indeed. So the theoretical review or literature review on corruption includes understanding corruption, what it is, when did it start, what are the typologies, what are the forms of corruption, and how can it be measured. And with regard to theoretical framework, the corruption triangle specifically. Also basic BIM literature reviews were done. But I'm not going to bore you with these issues and approach, but what I can summarize is empirical challenge. It's very much difficult or challenging to study corruption scientifically because of two reasons. First, due to the subjective bias, and then objective difficulties both in defining and measuring it. But I focus only on the corruption triangle for today's presentation. As Juncker and Pennington said, reality cannot be addressed without a theory in mind, because theory shapes and directs our vision. In fact, theory is the instrument or carrier that allows us to see what we want to see, and not always in a way we want to see it. Especially for a research like this, that tries to theorize the application of technology, needs to have a good theoretical background or foundation. So this corruption triangle was constructed by the famous sociologist and criminologist Donald Cressey nearly 70 years ago in his article entitled Other People's Money. He explained the theory in a simple way. This theory is well explained and interpreted in most investigative as well as theoretical books regarding minimizing effects of corruption, both at organization and industry levels. It explains about the three crucial elements for a corruption, in fact, for any kind of crimes to exist. These are motivation, rationalization, and opportunity. Motivation is a need or greed, usually referred as an incentive or pressure a corrupter has to commit the crime to meet financial obligations. So it could be out of need or greed, but that's the need for money in case of corruption. Rationalization, on the other hand, is the result of human complex. This is how we justify our bad deeds. We have to say, it's okay, I'm doing this. If I'm not doing this, anyhow, someone else will do it. I'm doing this because I deserve it. So many justifications we give to whatever crimes we commit. And opportunity is the suitable target or the loophole, whole favorable circumstance a corrupter finds in a system. So that's a loophole, basically, in a system, or it's understood to exist because of inefficiency in monitoring systems, poor management, bad leadership, and rotten organizations or organizational culture. Half a century later, Wolf and Hermansen, in 2004, to be specific, they appended capability as a fourth element. And for them, capability is the position corruptors hold, or the effective lying capacity, or their confidence, or it could be cohesive skill, or it could be their social and business link or relationship they have, and immunity to stress, so many things. So they say, even though corruptors have all these three, motivation, rationalization, and opportunity, if they don't have the capability, they wouldn't be exposed or they wouldn't be able to commit any kind of crime. Thus, as to this theory, a corrupter will first have an incentive or pressure, usually finance, and then takes advantage of an opportunity, usually weakness in control, which is accompanied by rationalization of his or her deeds. Motivation and rationalization, as you may understand, as you may guess, they are very much personal traits, and there is almost nothing that we can do about personal traits, at least technology-wise. I'm not saying it's impossible to cut those legs, but maybe this is an assignment to be given to institutions like education institutions or spiritual institutions like mosques or churches, so they can study, or I mean, they can coach people, they can give people this insight so that they can have reduced motivation and rationalization towards any kind of crime, including corruption. Nevertheless, opportunity seems to be the only element of the corruption triangle which can practically be controlled, at least utilizing technology. Therefore, if we are planning to systematically break one leg of the triangle, it should target opportunity. So reducing risks of corruption, it should involve at least breaking one leg of this triangle. Ideally, the three legs, but it's impossible in our case. So one leg, if we can break one leg, that's opportunity in our case, then we can easily mitigate risks of corruption. And most scholars point out that corruptors don't only look for opportunities to commit corrupt acts, that's to steal, but also opportunity to conceal these deeds. For this reason, most strategies in preventing corruption stem from this concept of breaking the triangle from the opportunity side in sense of closing loopholes, both in the practicing corrupt acts and concealing them. So not only opportunities to steal, but also we have to find a way of breaking their opportunity to conceal. So the very crucial anticipation here is that the non-corrupted behavior of automation. So the more we take decisions from people and give it to computers or any machine, so we believe that, so as a researcher, I anticipate that we can decrease this opportunity to steal and conceal. So how can it be studied? Like I said, it's empirically challenging to study corruption due to the subjective bias and objective difficulties in defining as well as measuring corruption. But we can systematically approach the way or how we should scientifically study corruption. So I will try to enlighten you with some of the concepts and perspectives I adopted. The research introduced a new platform. I perceived corruption as a project risk. So because of this, it has to be treated according to risk management body of knowledge. So there are these three fields of studies that are scrubbed together. So it's transdisciplinary. There is social study, corruption as a complex social phenomenon, and project management, specifically risk management body of knowledge. And on the other side, there is technology, building information modeling. So the question becomes, how can we conceptually integrate these disciplines? So I anticipate that for every kind of social problem, we can introduce or we can use risk management body of knowledge, and utilizing technologies, we can mitigate those risks. So imagine these three fields being integrated in kind of iterative manner. So management of social problems as an iterative and integrative process. So the other concept is what I call the infinite loop, because social problems are very dynamic problems. So it has to be studied and executed in an iterative manner. But there are these two concepts, a soft concept and a hard concept. A soft concept, we have the risk management and social study. So the study of any risk, it could be considered as a soft concept, and also social studies, of course. So we have the corruption on one side and technological study or technological application being as a hard concept. So where does this link come? Exactly, it's on the treatment part. So we have preparation, identification, analysis, evaluation, and treatment as an iterative process for corruption. And on the other hand, we have exploration of potentials, identification, concept development, and workflow. So it goes on. But if we link these two soft and hard concepts, so we can have this infinite loop. So talking about the research design, I love to show you my research design on this research onion. So the research onion was first developed by Sandulers et al. In 2007 to illustrate these layers of research strategies. Each layer of the onion describes more detailed stage of the research process. It is known to provide an effective progression through which a research methodology can be designed. So in my research, it's more of exploratory by its nature. So it leads to hypothetical and theoretical findings to absorb this new rationale granted to BIM, mitigating risks of corruption. So this basically justifies the choice of interpretivism at the level of philosophy. And on the level of approach, it's induction. So induction as an approach, discounting deduction. So I used three methods: survey, grounded theory, and archival study. So it's a mixed method by its nature. So the tools I used were talking of methods. First, mapping of corruption forms and schemes in all the states and decision points was done using secondary data and informants. Then as a process of pre-diagnosing corruption, an online questionnaire was disseminated to senior architects and engineering professionals, and 154 responses were collected and analyzed quantitatively. After identifying these critical states, highly vulnerable decision points across projects' value chains, semi-structured in-depth interview was conducted mainly to understand opportunities for corruption and risk prioritization. Most of the data were analyzed according to the coding procedures of grounded theory using atlas.ti software. Then to objectively verify whatever findings I had previously, I used public data review because they are more objective data. So fast forward to findings. The first finding was more than 85% of respondents, engineers, architects, they perceive corruption, corrupt exercise to be increasing in the Ethiopian AC industry. Only 1% or one individual perceived it as decreasing. But the question will be, why is the sector highly prone to corruption? There are so many factors. The first is nature of the industry, on the industry level and project level. On the industry level, the industry characteristics in Ethiopia, there is no single organization that's leading the industry. For instance, we have the construction industry, public procurement agency, and other agencies and offices which are not synchronously forwarding or putting procedures in place. And the dynamic structural and organizational reforms, the huge amount of fund directed to the industry, because whenever the money, there should be the crime somehow. So like I said, more than 65% of public expenditure goes to construction. And the other reason is the sector is very much traditional in Ethiopia, construction industry, and project characteristics also, of course, complexity, site specificity, and uniqueness of projects. This makes it very difficult, and this brings also opportunity for corruptors. Unlike other sectors like manufacturing or service, projects are very site-specific and unique. That means we cannot simply copy and paste, or we cannot simply duplicate buildings. So there will be, whenever there is fragmentation of information, then there will be information gap, which can be utilized by corruptors. So the second is fragmented project delivery system. So except very few and big projects in Ethiopia, design bid build, DBB, is the most common delivery system followed in public building construction projects. This delivery system assumes that designs are completed prior to bidding or pricing and construction. However, in reality, that's not the case. It's not only design and construction that's being separated even, but also design services and construction works are sliced and awarded to separate consultants and contractors instead of aggregating them. So for instance, in public projects like the Grand Housing Project or the Housing Development Project Office, as you can see, the project undergoes through multiple design bid build process to accomplish the whole package. So as you can see, consultant A and consultant B may be given to design the typology A and typology B of the housing buildings or housing designs. And consultant C can come to design, or consultant C can be given to design the neighborhood design. And then comes contractors. And then again, another consultant comes to design the infrastructure. And contractors also take it from consultants, and then they construct the infrastructure, and so on. So as you can see, it's very much sliced and fragmented. So the third is the procurement law. I call it the false promise of competitive low bid. Competitive low bid is the most commonly used method also in selecting contractors in building construction projects in Ethiopia. Even though the underlying motive of this selection procedure is to ensure a low price, the case seems to be the other way around. Arguably, competitive low bid is one of the causes for corrupt practices. This is because the procurement process doesn't have a system to avoid the possibility of awarding construction contracts to contractors who deliberately submit unrealistic or abnormally low tender, because they do this on the pretext of compensating losses through corruption. So most adversarial relationships start due to abnormally low tender. And the other is absence of checks and balances. As you all know, projects need effective checks and balance systems throughout value chains. So our construction industry doesn't have a system which ensures that no one person or department has absolute control over decisions on projects. So they're deprived from auditing, database, and quality assurance. So this, of course, gives corruptors additional opportunity, both to steal and conceal. And the fifth is the growing collective legitimization of corrupt transactions. As a society, I would say we're sinking. We start to legitimize corrupt transactions. We start to say it's okay. We start to perceive corruption as a way of doing business. And the other is a quest for survival. This is another legitimization, or this is how corruptors or consultants and contractors start to legitimize their deeds. And the other is poor justice and complaint review system, because we don't have this active or effective justice or complaint review systems. Corruptors would like to settle their disputes through corruption, because if they take it to the court or complaint review systems, it may take like 6 months or a year. So they would rather love to settle their disputes corruptly. And the other is weak enforcement and non-accountability. Corruption as a calculated exercise. They know they know this weak enforcement and non-accountability. So even if they are caught, they wouldn't face really so much charge. So if they are into this risk calculated. So the other thing is vulnerability to corruption assessment, or what we call VCA. So at different stages and decision points, about 28 stages and decision points were analyzed through VCA. This is how it's analyzed and reported. This response from not the interview, but the questionnaire, online questionnaire. This helps us to also somehow prioritize risks also. And for those stages perceived as highly vulnerable, heat map was done. This was taken further to the 20 interviewees, senior experts. They were asked to map the likelihood and relative impact of the risks. And from this, easily we can calculate EMV, that is expected monetary values. It's analysis in statistical concept in risk management that calculates the average outcome when the future includes scenarios that may or may not happen. So it's a function of probability and impact. And the same has been done for all the stages, like I said. So this is, for instance, at the construction stage, workmanship, site information, record, construction materials, payments. For all the stages, vulnerability to corruption assessment was done. So I feel I need to explain this critical stage briefly, only the critical ones. These are few of the critical or highly vulnerable stages. The pre-design phase, for example, it's perceived to be a foundation for grant corruption. For instance, flawed project inception. Projects are incepted or intentionally designed for personal gains. So it's like having a bridge when you don't have river. The other is poor project planning, lack of feasibility studies. More than 90% of building projects in Ethiopia don't go through feasibility studies. And higher officials, ministers, they promote foreign companies for corrupt transactions because it's very much easy to conceal those transactions. And for each stage, as you can see, risk or expected monetary values have been calculated. So on this stage, around 17% of project values could be lost. And the second is design phase. Estimation is known to be the hotbed for conspiracy here, because intentionally there is quantity manipulations, underestimation of quantities to favor front or backloaders, intentional overestimation of quantities, and intentional omission of work items for different reasons. And specification also, they deliberately put the yardsticks very loosened. This is also to favor the contractor, so that, for instance, when you put ceramic tile simply as a ceramic tile in the specification, obviously the contractor would have the opportunity to manipulate it, because we have ceramic tile that costs between $10 or even $5 up to $50 to $100. So we need to specify things in a proper way. The other is inflating unit prices. So they intentionally also inflate unit prices so that they can collude with contractors later on. And on tendering phase, this is one of the interviewers said, in Ethiopia, you don't win a project, you rather buy it. So they are either allocated or sold. It's very likely that officials, procurement departments, and technical teams negotiate with consultants and contractors to grant projects. So the negotiation could go as high as between like 5 to 10% of project values. And on tendering phase, of course, after planning and design stage, the whole mess up starts also when you begin to prepare the tendering document. Tender documents or their requirement and criteria are tailor-made to suit specific or favored contractors. And sometimes intentionally subjective criteria are put to manipulate the evaluation process. And construction or implementation phase is quality assurance, intentionally cause for change, and extra works also could be incomplete design and poor estimations, as variations in quantity are mostly considered errors in quantification. So they intentionally omit some items first, some work items, and then later they become additional work orders. So this is also one platform for corruptors or corrupt relationships between the three C's, contractor, consultant, and contractor, to intentionally omit items and then later to bring them as additional works. So when we prioritize these risks, this is risk severity rating. As you can see, pre-design phases are the most vulnerable stages and the most costly stage, and then comes tender document preparation and tender evaluation, and in the design phase it's mostly the estimation.
Now let's synthesize, because synthesis helps us to amalgamate fragmented knowledge we acquired so far and paves the way for theory construction. So I'm going to use the corruption element as a conceptual tool. Corruption elements I explained earlier. So imagine having this actor's capability and motivation for corruption as a function. So we have capability on one side and then motivation. So in the first quadrant, imagine having these 4 quadrants. In the first quadrant, we have people at operation level who have less motivation and also relatively less capability. That's less power and less network, social and business network. And then we have the second quadrant, where we have project participants who have relatively less motivation, but higher capability. And we have the third quadrant with actors who have the highest motivation, but their capability is relatively low. And we have the fourth quadrant, which is a very critical quadrant, with actors or project participants with higher motivation and higher capability. And basically, the fourth quadrant is filled with people who have the highest capability. These are top management people and officials and so on. I have to admit that I excluded some data and findings regarding stakeholders' relationships in this presentation to keep it shorter. And then we have the middle management relatively lower. So if we append or add opportunity in this function to understand what kind of stealing and concealing opportunities they utilize, for the fourth quadrant, for actors in the top, they use their overriding power to steal anything or to do any stealing. Their concealing opportunity is, of course, the lack of audits and accountability. And these people can dictate the design, procurement, and construction, everything about the project. And the third quadrant, these are middle management usually, and they use their strong social and business relationships or networks to steal. And the trust they build helps them also to conceal whatever crimes they do. And for those in the first quadrant, these are people at operation level. Like I said, their stealing opportunity is one's right to make errors. They could be doing it because they want to benefit something out of it, or they're forced or asked to make intentional errors. So the concealing opportunity is obviously because we don't have tracking or detection mechanisms. So when we go from first quadrant to third and fourth quadrant, as you can see, we don't have, unfortunately, actors on the second quadrant. This quadrant is people with low motivation but have the capability. From first quadrant to fourth quadrant, the cost of corruption also goes from petty corruption to grand or political corruption. And the middle management who use this social network are also key for collusive practices. So the manifestation of this corruption exercised by first quadrant and third quadrant is manifested as intentional error. And for the third and fourth quadrant is violation of procedures and contracts. So how do we mitigate now in utilizing BIM potentials? So our mitigating strategies, I will explain concepts and propositions. The first concept is project auditing. Imagine trying to bend this curve, in this capability motivation curve I explained. We cannot bend this curve towards left because while we're trying to do this, we are saying that we can minimize actors' motivation. But like I said, motivation is a very personal trait. So at least we cannot do this utilizing technology. But what we can do with technology is we can decrease their capabilities, that's bending it downwards. And to do this, we need to audit projects. But automating project audits, not auditing or manual project audits. So that's the first concept. So as we go from first to fourth quadrant, it goes from internal or active auditing to external or passive auditing, because the top management people, they are not directly or involved in everyday projects life cycle, but we can audit their economic decisions, political decisions after projects has been executed. So that's why I also called it passive auditing. And the other concept is monitoring project information. Opportunities subside when corruptors know that we care about small elements, details, and above all, any information. There shall be no minor information, in this case. So we don't have to give the privilege and access to modelers and every consultant or every public client to embed crucial informations like costs and specifications. So because of this, I say we detach the I and M in BIM. That is detaching the information and the modeling, embedding information and modeling as a means to segregate duties. And Wells and Haile says once, corruption schemes can occur when a corrupter thinks that no one is paying attention to the details. But in this concept, in my proposal, we can segregate duties by simply detaching the I. That is, whoever is embedding the information is not going to model the project. So segregating duties is one crucial or important strategy also in risk mitigation. So using these two concepts, I formulated this information monitoring framework. So from the top left side, you see the start. Institutions, we have institutions like Ministry of Construction or Ethiopian Standards Agency or Public Procurement Agency. These I call them creators, data creators or component creators. They simply create crucial information they can embed on components of models. And then comes the stakeholders. These are who utilize active BIMs, active BIM potentials. These are consultants, clients, contractors, subcontractors, and so on. Here, as you can see, the dimensions are internal audits. So whenever information exchange happens between each stakeholder, internal audits or monitoring should happen. And then it goes to passive BIM. Passive BIM is to automate external audits. So automated process or data engine, we can design data engine that can automate this process. We can archive such informations like in Office like OFAG, Office for Auditors General, for instance, and then goes to accountability or to INSA. It's to secure informations. So these are project phases. So first in design, procurement, implementation, and post-construction. So the task, a linear interpretation of the framework, as you can see below. First, there are creators, data creation, and then develop and model, and then comes review and procurement, especially at the construction of procurement stage. And then at the implementation, apply and implement comes, and then on audit, external monitoring, and then building accountability and reporting. So if I should summarize this information monitoring framework, it's simply to segregate information data, IFC component creators, modelers, and reviewers. And the other is ensure automated internal auditing whenever projects go through specific stakeholders. And the other is automate external audits, passive BIM, to evaluate projects and build accountability. And fourth is use integrated BIM model as a national database for future reference. So this, for future reference, I mean, for instance, when the hub is rich in information, we can even utilize big data analysis so that we can predict new trends coming also, or new opportunities that corruptors are starting to optimize. And based on substantive theory, also conceptual and strategic approach discussed, as well as proposed frameworks, 4 BIM-based propositions are forwarded. The first proposition is active BIM, automating internal audits to arrest errors. Like I said, especially at the design stage, internal errors, intentional errors, or deliberate errors are the most fruitful, or I'd say the hotbeds in estimation. So we can utilize dimensional capabilities easily, for instance, visualization, system coordination, and clash detection to see if such errors exist. Also construction planning and scheduling 4D, if intentional wrong estimation is made also. Then 5D is the most crucial capability also here, potential of BIM, that's quantity takeoff, cost estimation, and simulation. And the other is as-built and asset information management, 6D, because sometimes, not sometimes, I would say mostly, how do I say this? Contractors or implementers, maybe they are colluding with consultants and clients. They usually use not as under standard quality or under standard substandard quality of materials. So there is no way that we can confirm if they really used materials that are specified, if the specification is even properly done. So, but utilizing 6D, we can easily check and automate if the right materials are installed, the right fixtures are installed in place. And the second is automating design approvals, level of development and code verifications. We can use, we can check the appropriateness and completeness of designs, so that consultants and contractors and even owners or clients are not colluding. The other is automating progress monitoring and performance control. We can use BIM, we can utilize BIM with tools like RFID, radio frequency identity, to check if mismanagement of fixtures is not being done, and other technologies like laser scanning or photogrammetry, even to check the precision of concrete casting and so on. So we can optimize using these technologies. We can embed informations in the BIM model or as-built BIM drawings. We can synchronize these technologies easily and conclude projects. The other is breaking actors network. How can we break actors network and trust capitalizing technological processes? The first is e-procurement. You know, the development of internet technology is believed to change commerce application across industries. Although sluggishly, both developing and developed countries have started adopting platforms to improve the management of public works. Since its development, BIM has conditioned the traditional management of this platform, and advanced studies on value, integration, and application of BIM and e-procurement are being carried out for nearly a decade. So we can apply e-procurement. Whenever we apply e-procurement, we are hindering the personal relationships, social relationships. And the other is e-communication and the big room. The big room is the meeting or where all stakeholders, contractor, consultants, and sub-consultants come together to review the B model. So when we have this kind of transparent meeting or completely avoiding social relationships, but try to make communications electronically, we can easily break networks. The third is passive BIM, automating external audits. So passive BIM, automating external audits to build a culture of accountability. So we have to somehow transcend this manual automating to automated or utilization of computers. So as it's usually say, sunlight is the best disinfectant, and we can also, to build accountability, we can expose those informations that are automatically audited to the public. So the more we expose such information to the public, public authorities may start to feel threatened. And the other is when the creation and dissemination and archiving of project information are under the constant influence of both public and private stakeholders, automation of reliable data is also of paramount importance to ensure accountability. The fourth is activating passive BIM in reliance on promises of IPD. One of the prominent advantages brought about by BIM is integrated project delivery that we are usually oblivious or we forget to acknowledge. Every development, both in the technology as well as process aspect of BIM, should ultimately lead to IPD. As BIM Richards, the famous BIM Richards BIM maturity model, this is my perspective. There's the pre-BIM modeling, collaboration, integration, and obviously it should lead to integrated project delivery. So there are these aspects of IPD, integrated project delivery, that can promise us in risk mitigation. The first is negotiated price against competitive low bid, like I discussed. And the second is integrated team. Early involvement, the more we integrate project participants, of course it has its own downsides, especially this could be a threat also for collusion. But the more we involve project participants from the outset, there will be no such like errors, I would say, or additional work orders or variations shouldn't come at the end of the project, which recently or currently contractors are utilizing. And the third is integrating the process of planning, design, and implementation. This also avoids risks related to errors. And the fourth is risk management and reward system. Unlike design bid build, which transfers the risk to contractors, which in a way also contractors try to avoid this risk through corruption. In the case of IPD, all stakeholders share the benefits and the risks. So there will be no single project participant or stakeholder who tries to maximize from corruption. So in conclusion, I like to discuss challenges as well as prospects of BIM adoption for the very reason of mitigating corruption risks while summarizing relevant findings and lessons learned. The first lesson is the state of corruption in the AEC industry. It's complex, it's increasing. The other is there are many contributing factors like socioeconomic and political factors I discussed, and some of them are technical and institutional factors. But there lies also optimism and pessimism about BIM. Once the famous scientist Carl Sagan said, when we confuse hopes and facts, we slide into pseudoscience and superstition. He advocates that the real wisdom rests not only on understanding potentials, but also comprehending eminent challenges and limitations. So far I discussed briefly both the frozen and warmed up BIM potentials. Just before closing up my presentation, I would like to acquaint you with the challenges and the skepticisms related to this new rationale I granted to BIM adoption. So the first is the need and difficulty for cultural change and political change. So unless these things come easily, BIM adoption specifically for this purpose wouldn't be easy, because people are the center of corruption. They are not only the inventors, but they are the center of corruption. So, excuse me, there should be political commitment and also cultural change required. The other is technological and strategic limitations of BIM. As you can see in the graph, BIM is very much active in the pre-design a little bit, and then the design, tendering phase, and the potentials a little bit come down, unless we integrate them with other technologies like RFID or photogrammetry and other things. But the cost of corruption, unfortunately, like I explained, it's higher more in the pre-design and construction phases. So there is this technological gap. As you can see, the oval shapes. These are what I call technological gaps. We researchers and technology developers, we have to study further. And the third is humans' inherent behavior. So every anti-corruption strategy incubates another form of corruption. We cannot be immune from basic human behavior. So people will always try to optimize for personal benefits. So whatever system we install, they will also try to find new kind of opportunities. And the other is legal and contractual barriers. So these are my optimisms on BIM. So this research or presentation, I'm not claiming that BIM would be the ultimate solution to corrupt practices, but it could be a good platform for a new perspective. This could also be one compelling reason why developing countries like Africa should adopt BIM, because these countries are in short of strategies and tools to combat corruption that's shackling the industry. So I strongly believe such academic or theoretical research will provoke policymakers, technology developers, and adopters looking from different perspectives. So like Juncker and Penican said, not only it is simply impossible to know everything about everything, we can't even be sure we know what we know. What we know escapes our full understanding, yet it's at the same time an unlimited source. So I believe this would be a good springboard for further studies. Thank you very much.